in special way. So please welcome Marianne Williamson.
To be here. It's always wonderful for me being here in Los Angeles, one of the places that truly feels like home for me, and to have met Heather 3 days ago, Bertie's stepdaughter. Her mother, Jane Sanders, is a very, very special woman, and of course we hope that one day she will be part of America's first family. So. I'd like to talk to you tonight about 3 people. Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders. I ran for president, as you know. Thank you to those of you who supported me. And I spent a year in that belly of the beast. And I think that's more literally true than most of us even realize. I experienced a lot of things. And one thing that I experienced is that of those 3 people, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders, they are all really fine, really good, really nice people. And I think that that's particularly significant, number one, because I speak that as someone who was in a situation where I was not expected, and there were a lot of different attitudes thrown at me, but all 3 of those people showed me kindness and showed me respect, and I think that means something. That's number one. And number 2, we're going to be going through a lot together over the next 3 months. And I think that all of us agree that the most important thing of all is that Donald Trump is replaced and does not get a second. So something that I had said a few minutes ago when we were outside in the lobby is that a lot of the work over the next few months will be psychological and emotional. Because we must find a way to embrace in our hearts whatever person is the Democratic nominee. And so I think for all of us, especially on a night like tonight, where so many of us, I know and I'm assuming many of you, if not all of you, and if it's not all of you now, I hope by the end of the night it will be all of you, really, really, really want Bernie Sanders to take this. I want Bernie Sanders to take things home. There is a great contest going on here. And within the Democratic Party, it is the contest between what's called the moderate wing of the Democratic Party and the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Now, it's kind of interesting because to hear Joe Biden, who I do like very much as a person, say that it's time to restore the soul of the Democratic Party, to me, that's why we need Bernie. You know, when I grew up, anytime you ever asked my father, who'd you vote for, Daddy, in a presidential election, all the way up to his death in 1995, he would respond, FDR, voted for Roosevelt. So I was raised in a home where, even though I am a passionate student of American history, I would have read plenty about Roosevelt anyway. He had a very special place in my family's political lore. And so what Bernie Sanders represents, and this is important because one of the memes thrown at him is, he's not a Democrat. Well, I have a couple of things to say to that. And the first one has to do with what I've already pointed out. Bernie Sanders is standing on a platform more aligned with the core of what the Democratic Party supposedly stands for than any other candidate in the race. Because I'm old enough to remember a time when the Democratic Party had a soul. And it lost it around the 1990s, when the money that began to be poured into the political system was so outrageous And President Clinton had this idea with something called the Democratic Leadership Council, that the Democratic Party could play footsies under the table and work with all those corporate forces, and they too could win at that game. And it split the soul of the Democratic Party. Before that time, the Democratic Party was known for one thing, that the Democratic Party stands on the side of the working people of America. It needs to stand there again. Over the last 40 years, there has been such a massive transfer of wealth in this country. Starting with the Reagan presidency, there has been such a massive transfer of wealth in this country through corporate tax cuts, through corporate subsidies, through tax cuts for the very wealthiest Americans. And this transfer of wealth has taken us to a point where 1% of Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90%. This economic theory that was proffered to us as a wonderful thing, trickle-down economics, was going to be great, you see. It meant that all the corporation should have is financial responsibility to its own stockholders. And that means capitalism completely untethered from conscience. That means capitalism untethered from any sense of ethical or moral responsibility to people or to planet. And kids, I'm old enough, I gotta tell you, you might not even believe this. It sounds so far from the reality that you know. You know, I actually lived at a time when the American corporation was expected to care. I grew up in a time when if somebody had worked for a corporation for decades, it was the social understanding that that corporation cared whether or not that person had a dignified retirement. But with trickle-down economics in the 1980s, it was this idea that, oh, if we get all the money, you see, if we give as much money as possible to the stockholders, then all that money will trickle down because they'll create jobs. And it'll be great, they'll be the job creators, and all that money will trickle down and it will lift all boats. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, after 40 years, I think we can say that the jury is in. It did not lift all boats. It has left millions of people without even a life vest. It has created a situation where tens of millions of Americans have no idea and live with the chronic economic tension and anxiety of not having any idea what will happen if they get sick. And they don't know what would happen if one of their kids gets sick. And they don't know what they're going to do to get their kids to college. And they don't know what they're going to do to pay off these college loans. That is chronic tension and anxiety. I'm going to tell you something. Now everybody talks about the mental health crisis. Every time that the politicians talk about what they're going to do to solve the mental health crisis, you know what I'm thinking to myself? Why don't you stop passing laws that make it inevitable that people are driven crazy? This economic theory of the last 40 years has decimated America's middle class. It has created the largest income inequality in almost 100 years. This is what's extreme. This is what's radical. Bernie Sanders is not extreme. Bernie Sanders is not radical. The massive transfer of wealth over the last 40 years into the hands of a very, very tiny group of Americans, that's what's extreme. That's what's radical. And too often, the Democratic Party played along. Good for Bernie. And so what is happening now is that we need a course correction. And the difference between the moderate candidates and the progressive candidates is that the moderate candidates are saying, let's take an incremental approach to this. What do you mean an incremental approach? Why? Why should it take time? It didn't take you guys time to pass, and this is not the Democrats who did this was the Republicans, but to the political establishment I say, it didn't take you guys time to pass the 2017 tax cut, $2 trillion tax cut, where 83 cents of every dollar is given to the very richest Americans. It didn't take you guys time, and this does include the Democrats as well as the Republicans, to pass the $738 billion National Defense Authorization Act this year, which gives all those billions of dollars to the military industrial complex, even over and above what the military says that they want. It didn't take you time to do that, so we don't need to take a lot of time to pass universal health care. It shouldn't take a lot of time to make sure that everybody can have free tuition at colleges and universities. Enough is enough. Over the last few decades, the American people have been trained to expect so little. Over the last few decades, the American people have been trained to say, pretty please. No, we need to say a very rambunctious, a very stylish, a very elegant, hell no, that shit stops now. American thing in the world. You know, in 1776, 56 men signed the Declaration of Independence. And this was a very brave thing for them to do, because by so doing, they were committing treason against the King of England. And if the British had won that war, those men would have been hanged as traitors. And they, by signing that declaration, they encoded into the founding of a country the most enlightened, the most aspirational principles to have ever formed the founding of a nation. It was the most radical that ever done that 200 years ago, and it is still radical today, those ideas. The idea that all men are created equal. Before that, it was all about a monarchy and an aristocracy, where the whole idea was that one person, and that person's rich friends, the aristocracy, that they were entitled to all the majority of the resources of the country, and everybody else was basically serving them. With the founding of this country, with the statement that all men are created equal, with the statement that God gave all men inalienable rights of life and of liberty and of the pursuit of happiness, that entire paradigm was repudiated. It was rejected, and it was rejected by men who were willing to risk their lives in order to do so. And the Declaration of Independence goes on to say that governments are instituted to secure those rights, the rights of the people. And it goes on to say that if that government is not doing its job, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. What has happened is that we've lost our psychological and emotional bonding with those principles. They're written on marble walls in Washington and other places. They're written on parchment behind glass in museums. But we've lost our emotional connection to them. If those principles aren't inscribed in our hearts, they become dead. And that is what needs to be reinvigorated. The audacity, the original audacity of the American experiment, the rambunctiousness of the American experiment. And John Adams, our second president, said that he hoped that every July 4th, Americans would revisit their first principles. But you see, that signing, that declaration and the drama around it is where it all began. And all that has happened since is that every generation reenacts the same drama. Because you see, although those men, 56 of them, signed that declaration, even though that's where all the enlightened and aspirational principles were first encoded, that situation is also where it began to be so gnarly. Because 41 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were themselves slave owners. You see, we have always been both. That bipolar nature of the American character is built into the cake. It is the American DNA. We are both, and we have been both in every generation, and we are both in this generation. Both people whose hearts are ablaze with the very possibility of what it means to have a society where anybody can soar. Everybody has equal opportunity to actualize their God-given potential and become whatever they want. That idea and the radicalism of that idea, we are ablaze with that idea. But every generation as well has contained forces, and that was not only true in 1776, it's also true today. We've also contained forces which usually for their own economic benefit are willing to even violently and heinously transgress against the principles on which we stand. Now, every generation plays out that struggle. Every generation plays out that contest. And it is simply our turn. Because we had slavery in this country, but let's not forget, then we also had abolition. And we had the institutionalized suppression of women in this country. But then we also had the women's suffragette movements. We had the institutionalized white supremacy and segregation in the American South. And then we had the civil rights movement. It is simply our time. And Thomas Jefferson himself said, "It is the general tendency of the rich to prey upon the poor." Now, not every rich person is a greedy bastard, by far. And not every poor person is noble and pure. This isn't about individuals. It's definitely not about demonizing individuals if we're coming from a space of nonviolence. But it is about calling out corrupt systems. Today, it's not an evil institution like slavery. Today, it's not an evil institution like segregation or the suppression of women. It is more like a mindset. It is an economic mindset which posits a new aristocracy That's what we have is a new corporate aristocracy. They used to have landowners. Now they have health insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, oil and gas companies, chemical companies, gun manufacturers, agribusiness, food companies, and military industrial contractors. And they're like a new aristocracy. And we're all supposed to bow down to their short-term profits. Their short-term profits. Well, they have to get their short-term profits, just like the old aristocracy. And then after they get their short-term profits, everybody else gets to what? Divvy up what's left? Once again, very kindly, very sweetly, oh no, hell no, we're with Bernie. Our country. You know, some people these days, I feel that too many people are unbalanced in one direction or the other. Some people only want to talk about what's good about America and won't look at our underbellies. And it's important, whether you're a nation or an individual, you have to look at your shadow. You have to bring it up. You have to own it. You have to atone for it. You have to make amends for it in order to heal and transform. But then there are other people these days, and it seems like all they want to talk about is what we've done wrong. And that's just as unbalanced because America hasn't done everything wrong. We've done good things too. And even when we have done wrong things, and we have done very wrong things, our tendency has been over time to self-correct. Yes, it's important that we identify racism. Yes, it's important that we identify slavery. Yes, it's important that we identify systemic injustices. Yes, it's important to identify the problems in our past and in our present. But it's important that we identify with the problem solvers in our past and in our present. And we are among them. Right. The moderates in this race feel that we can take an incremental approach. And I believe that we don't have time to take an incremental approach. That was made clear in the last election. And in the last election, a woman who said, let's just continue with the success of the Obama years, was met by millions of people who said, what success? I'm freaking drowning here. And they thought that they were voting for a change agent. You know, I'm one of those people who, as horrified as I was by the election of Donald Trump 4 years ago, I'm not one of the Americans who was radically surprised. And I'll tell you why. Because I knew that rage of despair. I knew that rage that so many millions of people were feeling because they knew, and they were right, that the American economy had become rigged against them. And so I felt it's either going to be a progressive populist or it's going to be an authoritarian populist. But a woman who's not even naming the pain is going to have a really rough time. People want to feel that they are heard, and they want to feel that their pain is seen and acknowledged. And so now we're going to run somebody who's going to say the same thing that she said and lost with? Let's just continue the times that we were having then. I don't think so. Because that rigging, they were legitimate. And I think that many people who voted for Trump believing that maybe he could fix it are still upset at the rigging against them and are open to the possibility that maybe he didn't, but maybe Bernie would. Yeah. The idea it's extreme to have universal health care for everybody. It shouldn't be seen as extreme to have universal access to higher education. And let me tell you something else. It should not be seen as anti-capitalist. I'm not an anti-capitalist, but I believe in capitalism with a conscience. What has happened is that capitalism has become completely untethered from any sense of moral or ethical responsibility to people or to planet. And our government has become its handmaiden. Our government has become a handmaiden to this. It's become a system of legalized bribery, and the political elite and the political establishment in both major parties is part of that corporate aristocracy. And I say, good on you, Bernie, for calling in on that. And you know, I know. I've been there. I saw how it works. And they sent it at me, but you know what? I learned from running for president that the system is even more corrupt than I feared. But I also learned from running for president that the American people are even more wonderful than I knew. I learned that if we just remember that Jeffersonian principle, which to me now is I'm more committed to it, more convinced behind it than ever before. And that is that the only safe repository for power is in the hands of the people. what I saw among the people in Iowa, what I saw among the people in Nevada, what I saw among the people in New Hampshire, what I saw among the people in South Carolina, is that if the DNC would get out of the way and stop putting its finger on the scales, the American people could handle this. Fingers on the scale last time for Hillary, then either Hillary or Bernie would have won the primaries, but you know what? We all would have felt good about it, and I don't think Trump would be the president today. I have been watching it because I've been in the middle of it. This entire year has been like watching a slow car crash because I've seen how they work and how they have been doing this for a very, very long time from the beginning of this campaign. And last year it had to be one woman. This year it has to be their little group. And so there's only one response that is powerful enough to override an aristocracy, whether that is an aristocracy of corporations or whether it is an aristocracy of a political elite in the form of a campaign media industrial complex. There's only one way to override that, and that is for the people to stand up. Yeah. I wanted to talk about was Elizabeth Warren. And I have a lot of affection for Elizabeth Warren. And I'm not one of those people who has, Elizabeth or Bernie, and I see all that stuff. That's not where I live. You know, it's like in an intimate relationship. You have to be able to duke it out. You have to be able to fight, but we can fight fair and we can fight lovingly. But there's something about Bernie that was true 4 years ago, and it's true again. That man has hit the vein. That man has ignited the passions of millions of Americans, particularly young Americans. He proved it 4 years ago, and he's already proven it again. Let us not forget, he won Iowa, and he won New Hampshire, and he won Nevada. And I think that it is very reasonable to point out that for all of these decades, he has really been there for the American people. He has really been an advocate for the American people. And tonight and tomorrow, we need to be there for Bernie. There's one other thing that I'd like to point out before I let you go on to enjoy the rest of the evening. And that is something Saul was mentioning about peace. As you know, when I was running peace creation, peace building, a Department of Peace was a very big issue for me. I think one of the most dangerous areas where our corporate aristocracy, this in the form of the military-industrial complex, is the most dangerous, has to do with the fact that military defense contractors have too much of an influence over American foreign policy. One of the reasons I feel strongly about endorsing and standing with Bernie is because of the war in Yemen. The war in Yemen, there is something so hideous going on here. And that is that for the sake of a $360 billion arms sale to the Saudi Arabians. The Saudi Arabians with that prince of theirs, the crown prince, who we know murdered that journalist, Khashoggi. Yep. And yet, we, for the sake of a $360 billion arms sale to him, we are giving aerial support to his genocidal war against Yemen. Our grandparents would be rolling over in their graves. Our grandparents would be rolling over in their graves that where the United States is supporting a genocidal war. And you know what, in a way, to me, is even worse than the fact that the United States is actually, as we speak, supporting a genocidal war? That you and I aren't even talking about it. But I'll tell you who has been talking about it. Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders led the effort in Congress to actually override President Trump's ability to do that. Unfortunately, the president was able to override that. But you see, I don't forget things like that, and neither should you. Bernie Sanders has always been in situations like that, taking a stand, even when those stands were unpopular, even when those stands were not politically glamorous, even when those stands were not politically accepted. This is one of the most critical moments in American history. Capitalism must correct itself now. And American capitalist leaders, some of the most powerful ones, do know that. They know that. That's why people like Ray Dalio, people like Jeremy Grantham have been saying so. Even the Business Roundtable, which is one of the most conservative business groups out there, has now declared that short-term profit for the corporation must no longer be its bottom line. And they're right, and they're not stupid, because they know that if they don't start getting that act together, it won't be Bernie or Elizabeth or Marianne. It will be a generation after us that storms that Bastille. Because you've got millions of young Americans who are saying, what the hell has global capitalism ever done for me? And who are looking at socialism and saying, what should I be afraid of, the free healthcare or the free college? I believe that the most evolved, enlightened society is a blend of the great entrepreneurial spirit that capitalism can bring and the socialist insistence that there must be a concern for the common good. That's what America is at our best. We both protect individual freedom and allow for the entrepreneurialism and the creativity and all the wonderful things that have to do with people being able to spread their wings, and it also takes care of the common good. That's why we need to cancel these college loans. That's why we need to give people free access to education. That's why we need to give people free access to healthcare so they can soar, so that they can live their dreams, so they can actualize their potential, so that they can think entrepreneurs, so that they can be on capitalism if they want to do. It's not going to build their economy, let more people in. The problem in America is not that some people can make money. The problem in America is that not enough people can make money. That's the problem in America. And so I don't think the average person in America who creates wealth wants to feel that they are doing that at the expense of everybody else having a chance too. This is our chance. We've gone way off course. American capitalism is straight off course. The American government, as its handmaiden, is straight off course. And it needs like a big chiropractic adjustment. And it's time. It is time right now. It is not time to go with forces, even within the Democratic Party, who say, well, we got to take it slower, we got to moderate. No, you actually don't. It is a sociopathic economic system, just like it is a sociopathic person that has no empathy, that has no remorse, that does not care about people. That is a sociopathic economic system. It has done enough damage. It has done enough harm. Enough people are suffering. It is time to show up and to stand up. And there is no spirituality that doesn't care about the suffering of other sentient beings. It is my spirituality that makes me a progressive. Spirituality is not some other element. There is no religious or spiritual path anywhere that gives any of us a pass on addressing the suffering of other sentient beings, and we need to address that suffering now. That's what Bernie will do if he's president. That's what I'm going to do.